Hello, today I'm going to be talking about my journey in Info 362. Now, when first enrolling into this class, I expected to pretty much just learn the technical skills required to use Photoshop and Illustrator, and that sounded cool already. However, after taking the class, I realized that there's much more than just the technical skills when creating a graphic. Info 362 turned out to be a class where I've not only learned a multitude of these technical skills, but also how to translate these skills into making a visually appealing and comprehensive graphic. So first, I'm going to be talking about the information I use to exploit the visual potential in them. First and foremost, I'm going to be talking about my appearance display. Obviously, these are the pictures of the players on Dallas Field. The players' pictures provide visual potential in the form of appearance. Anyone who follows the Overwatch League will easily recognize these players' faces. These pictures allow the viewers to quickly avert their attention to these players' information without even having to read the labels for their names. And although my infographic is mainly targeted towards viewers who are already watching the Overwatch League, including these pictures also help those unfamiliar with the league. This is because the viewers will be able to connect these players' faces to their names, and if they ever start watching the Overwatch League, they'll know who they are. Next, I'm going to be talking about my location display. So the piece of information I use for my location is to show where each player on Dallas Field is originally from. This has great visual potential because all of the players on Dallas Field come from pretty much all around the world. This would not be able to be shown in just text form because it would be hard for my viewers to visualize all the players around the world from just the name of their country. So this is very important to use, for example, in a map on my display because it helps show the diversity of the team. Next, I would like to talk about my numbers display. So the piece of information I used on my number display was Dallas Field's win percentage on each map in the game. This piece of information has visual potential through numbers because, well, percentage is pretty much bigger or smaller based on how well they're doing on each map. This can be shown, for example, in a bar graph, and it shows comparable numbers rather than just textual information. The next piece of information I used for my time display is the match schedule for the Dallas Field matches. This is a bit obvious because a schedule is just in chronological order, and the match schedule is also divided into stages 1, 2, 3, and 4. And this has visual potential because time in chronological order can be displayed visually, basically from left to right. And also the stages being sectioned out have even more visual potential for me to display it as different sections on a timeline. And the final piece of information I used for my relationship display is the roles that each of the players have on the team. And this has visual potential because each player is grouped up based on their role, and there's also players who not only specialize in one role but perform in multiple roles. So this has visual potential to show which players are grouped up on which role, which players are good on multiple roles, and pretty much which role each player plays. So enough about just talking about the broad visual potential. Let's get into the nitty-gritty. So first, I'm going to talk about the encoding I used for a couple of my displays. More specifically, my number display and my relationship display. So for my numbers display, what I used to encode the numbers are the length of the bars in the bar graph. I chose to do this to compare the win percentage of Dallas Field on each map, and I think a bar graph makes sense here because viewers will be able to very easily compare these numbers because they're right next to each other on the bar graph. And it also helps that there's labels on the bottom to cleanly represent what percentage of win rate that Dallas Fuel has on these maps. Another way I tried to encode this information is in a pie chart. However, I decided to use a bar chart in the end because with so many different categories and so many different maps that they play on, it started to get a little cluttered, and it was more difficult to read the text and extrapolate the information easily. With the bar graph, viewers can just look, oh, Oasis has such a long bar. Dallas Fuel obviously excels more at Oasis, and Dorado and Eichenwald, on the other hand, have such small length in the bars. So probably Dallas Fuel doesn't do too well on them. And for my relationship display, I encoded using color. So my dark blue shows the sections where the players specialize in those roles, whereas the lighter blue shows the sections where the players can play 2 roles. For example, Taimu plays both tank and offensive role. I use a Venn diagram because I think it's a very common way to show overlapping, and that's the main thing not only overlapping, also separation in categories. And that's pretty much the main thing I wanted to show through my relationship display. I wanted to show which players played one role and which players played multiple roles and which roles they were. Another way I tried to represent this information and encode this information was just using a tree diagram where I just use lines to connect the player to the labels. So for example, XQC, Coco, and Mickey would have one line going to tank, whereas Taimu would have 2 lines separating out to tank and offense. However, this was not as intuitive as a Venn diagram because everyone knows what a Venn diagram is and how to read it. Not so much with my tree diagram. Next, I'm going to be moving on to the colors that I used. And honestly, the reason I chose my color model was because on the left you can see that the Dallas Fuel colors are blue, and I wanted to use the color model that would be best to associate with and complement the colors of Dallas Fuel, and this blue one worked pretty well. So it was pretty easy to copy my color model or emulate my color model because it was just a monochromatic blue and there wasn't many different things to take into account there. So as you can see here, I use the same blue for the map, exactly the same as I used my model. I use the same color for the text and the description text, the label text, and the heading text. And I also use the same color they use to highlight certain sections on their infographic, to highlight the sections of my stages on my timeline. However, I had trouble emulating some colors in my infographic because I couldn't exactly find where to put these tan or brown colors, because in my model these colors didn't really have a huge place in it. However, if I tried to put them in, for example, my bar graph or my Venn diagram, it'd be kind of overwhelming in comparison to how my model used it. So I couldn't find a way to subtly use these colors in the way that my model did. I also chose blue because I feel like blue is a very common color, and since my infographic isn't really inciting any action or anything like that, I think it's best for my viewers to be calm and just take in the information. So next, I'm going to be moving on to the typography of my infographic. So the fonts that my infographic used mainly are the Tahoma bold for the titles, and it's called Lilawadi UI is kind of funny for my description text. And my infographic overall actually doesn't contain that much text in comparison to a lot of other infographics that I saw. So I didn't have much chances to emulate my typography model. I also used the typography strategy shown in my model, where they use lines to connect their labels to the pieces of information that they're showing. As you can see in my map on the left side, I connect the names of the players to their location on the map using lines. So next, also I utilize some identity labels in both my timeline and in my map shown here. As you can see, the labels underneath my appearance displays pretty much show the name of the player that the information and the graphic is about. For example, Coco is obviously a picture of Coco, and the location connects to the player Coco. Next, I'm going to be moving on to the visual language of my infographic and the model that I connected it with. So my model uses both realistic pictures, as you can see on the right, of the football player, as well as sort of filled silhouettes of certain icons. And they also use a multitude of circles and lines and boxes around the labels. So first, I'm going to show exactly what I mean by the realistic picture. So on the right side is a picture of the player, of the football player. My model was about football and statistics on football. So on the left side, you can see that I'm using a realistic photo of Chips Hyen to represent him. And one thing is that my visual language model used black and white. However, I tried to use black and white, also a monochromatic blue. However, it looked kind of weird to me if their faces was blue and everything, and black and white didn't fit my color model. So I decided just to keep it as the normal colored, since the jerseys themselves have blue on it. Even though it slightly deviates from my color model, it still complemented each other, and I think it looked better than changing it to black and white or changing the entire picture to blue, a monochromatic blue. And next, I'm going to be talking about the silhouettes of the icons. I don't think there's much to mention here other than that they have little detail in them. However, it's not just purely silhouettes. Like in the Dallas Field icon, there's some lines in between just to add more detail, and on the football helmet there's the little face area, I don't know what that's called, and the little hinge on the side to represent a little bit more detail, which is what I did in the Dallas Field logo. And for the bar graph, I tried to emulate it practically exactly as my visual language model. They have sort of dimmer lines in between, and their labels on the bottom are separated out kind of far, and the thickness of the bars on the bar graphs I tried to emulate. It may look different because I tried to blow up the visual language model one, and it looks kind of weird and blurry. But I tried to match it pretty much exactly as the bar graph in the visual language model. And I also put the labels inside the bars. And just some more examples of me emulating the model is that the model utilizes so many circles and lines connecting to these circles for labels, and I also used for my timeline and for my map, I use circles and dots to indicate places on the map and on the timeline, and I connected it using lines and it makes it easier for the viewers to pretty much associate like the labels and the icons to the places on the displays. So next, I'm going to be moving on to my visual hierarchy. So I created my visual hierarchy mostly through size of the displays. I made the more important displays take up more room on the infographic, whereas the displays that have a little bit less information are a little bit less important to have the smaller sections on the infographic. For example, the map and the player origins is one of the more interesting and have more information, and I made it a big display on the top right. Same with the timeline on the bottom left. And I made the smaller ones about the pure statistics about the team. And I think this helps guide the viewers because the more important ones, for example on the top right, has to do with the players and the overarching information about the players, and then it leads them to this smaller piece of information about the players on the bottom right, which is the player roles on the team. Same with the match schedule on bottom left. So the match schedule is kind of the more important and bigger aspect about the matches for the Dallas Fuel, and then it leads them to the other piece of information about matches, which is their win rate above it. Next, I'm going to be talking about how I created Unity in my infographic. So I created Unity throughout my infographic by first using the dots in multiple places, the dots and lines in multiple places in my infographic. It would be kind of weird to use different shapes. For example, I could have used squares in my map and circles in my timeline, something like that, but it would make it too opposite with each other, and they would look kind of out of place. But using circles for both of them make it seem and I learned this from my visual language model. It's just reusing the same shapes throughout the infographic, make them seem unified. It's the same concept with the labels that I use in my timeline, for example, in my timeline and in my map. For example, the boxes around the player names and the stage labels use the dark blue box with the lines connecting to it. And I also created Unity in using the same title and line under the title in my displays. It can kind of be more easily seen as a whole, so I'm going to show it here and talk about it a little bit more. As you can see on the top right and the bottom left, my map and my timeline, they both use dots, and the titles for my sections have the same line under them on the top right and the bottom left, and the top left and bottom right also match with each other. However, in order to create variety, I kind of changed the same aspects that I just talked about in Unity. So although I used dots in both my map and my timeline, I changed the color so that it wouldn't look too bland and too similar with each other. And I also changed the type of title line I used throughout my infographic, and it's more easily talked about again, showing throughout my whole infographic. So as you can see, the colors of my timeline and the colors of my map lines and dots are different. It just helps create more pop and just more variety in them, obviously. And then in the titles, some of the titles are above the infographic, and some of them are more scrunched. On my displays, for example, on the map and the timeline, the title and description are above it, whereas on the smaller displays, the title and description is on the left side. And this also emulates my visual language model, and I also pulled this from a visual language model because some of their titles are on top, with the lines on the bottom. Pretty much what I just said. The visual language model uses the same concept. They made their smaller displays have the scrunched up text on the left, whereas the bigger displays had the bigger text on the top. Next, I'm going to talk about the layout of my infographic. In the beginning, I actually changed my layout model from what I had in the beginning because the amount of displays I had didn't really fit with my layout in the beginning. So since I combined my appearance and my location, I had a bit less number of displays, and they didn't fit very well, my old one. So in my new one, the sections are a bit bigger, which were required because my displays were pretty big, and it had the perfect amount of sections that I needed. So as you can see, on the top right and bottom left are the biggest sections, which is what I did on my model, and they are also the most important and informational conveying sections of the infographic, similar to my layout model. And they also put the smaller statistical information on the top left and bottom right, similar to how I did it. I deviated a little bit on the top left as they had many subsections in there with many smaller different pieces of information, whereas I just had one bar graph that shows the win rate on each map. However, I think it still matches pretty well because it matches the outer layout, and it puts the more important things on the bigger sections and the less important things on the smaller sections. And finally, sorry, I'm going to talk about the alignment of my infographic. And I'm going to be honest, I think alignment is where I kind of did worst on my infographic. It's something I didn't pay attention to very much in comparison to the other aspects of my infographic, and it's definitely something I need to work on in the future whenever I create my different graphics. But some things I did for alignment is that just to square out the sections, I made the text labels on the left side of these displays try and align with the size of the displays that it represented. So like on the left side, I tried to make the height close to the display on the right, same with the bar graph. But again, this is the most something I overlooked in mine, and I definitely could have made the alignment in my map better. I could have aligned the players somewhat to a grid or something like that to make it look a lot cleaner. But here I kind of just put them, wherever it had space. I didn't really pay much attention to alignment, and yeah, it's something I could have done better in this section. Also, on my infographic, the text doesn't exactly line up with each other. Like on the left side, the label of my bar graph and my title on the top left don't line up very well with each other, and also just all around it's a little messy, and it's something I need to work on, and I'm gonna fix so I can put my infographic on my portfolio. I'm gonna fix the alignment of the text and the sections and the displays that I have on here. Like on the right side, you can see they actually sectioned it out based on the line of their title, and the displays don't ever go further than the title. And that's something I could do. Like on my bottom left on the season 1 match schedule, it doesn't extend far enough to cover my whole section and makes it look messy, and everything kind of isn't in a box or in a good place to complement each other. But that's pretty much a lot of the things that I learned through this class, and I had a lot of fun throughout this class, and I'm still proud. I'm pretty proud of what I created as the end result. So thank you for listening and watching. and I'll definitely use these skills in the future.